All right, now we're live. Hello, Dorje-la. Very nice to see you online.
Lovely to see you again, Anna.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity you're offering, we are offering to the new translators. I really hope they benefit. And I wish we had this type of discussion when we were studying in Dharamsala,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with the questions because we have quite a few. And the first one is, how do you prepare for the teachings? And there are two types of teachings these days, right? When you know a teacher and when it's someone new. So could you please expand on both?
Yeah, this is great because when we were studying, we weren't given any guidance. So when I came here to Australia, knowing no one, completely on my own, I just had to work out something. And so for those who are new, I hope my experience helps to inspire them to find their own method. But the method that I've used is I put a lot of time into preparation. I prepare really well because I find if I understand the topic very well beforehand and I'm familiar with the language that will be used, then I can put most of my mental energy into not so much of the meaning of what is being said, but how I can then present it to the audience, to the class, because I'm understanding very well. If I prepared well, I'm understanding very well what's being said. So I'm not really needing to concentrate on the meaning, so I can think of how to phrase things and express things. And so I put a lot of effort into the preparation. And so when I prepare, usually where I can, I translate the text myself. And especially if it's verses, then it's quite easy to do. If it's a large text, then it depends, but usually not. But so where I can, I do translate for myself. And the advantage of that is then the line order, especially in verses, matches very closely to the English and the Tibetan matches. Because for a published book, you want it to be very beautiful, to read it and understand it. So therefore, the line order often doesn't match the Tibetan, but the teacher will usually go line by line by line. And it's just a little uncomfortable as a translator. And I think for the students, when you're bouncing all over the verse. So if I make my own translation, I don't go for eloquence in the written translation, but more for accuracy, because I try and put the eloquence across in the oral translation. And that just, I think, makes a better experience for the students, that the class flows better. So how I prepare then is, especially if it's not verses, but it's prose, is I will, in both texts, I will number the paragraphs, so that paragraph 1, 2, 3, and I'll then number the English sentences in that paragraph, A, B, C, and match that to the Tibetan. So it takes a little bit of time, but it means I can always match the Tibetan to the English, even if there's a question from a few pages back. I can always match it very easily. And or if the Geshe wants to jump ahead or go back, I haven't had that experience, but I'm prepared. So this is something that I always do. And if it's a verse, then I will match match line 1 with the Tibetan and the English, line 1, line 2, just like that. It just makes it much easier to when I'm actually feeling the pressure of translating, that there's less to worry about. So this is something that I always do. And then I also prepare a cheat sheet, you could say. I have one here. So just I don't have a camera on, but that's in front of my face. It should be there. So I just match some Tibetan words with some English below. And these will either be vocabulary I'm not so familiar with that I need to refer to, but it's usually technical vocabulary that's going to come up many times. And it's specific to this topic. So I may not have heard it for a few years. So it's not going to spring to mind. So I have something like this, just sits on the table next to me, or I have it on my screen because I don't translate with paper. I translate on my laptop, so I type. And so I can have my notes on the screen in front of me. So this helps a lot, but it all takes time to prepare. But it's like one of the classes I'm translating is from the Lamrim Chemo on karma. So some of this terminology on the detail of karma, what doesn't always come up unless it's in this topic. So this just helps. So that's something that I do. And then something that I don't do so much now, but when in my earlier years, I've been translating now for 8 years, I put a lot of thought into choosing English vocabulary, because over the 5 decades or so that people have been translating, there's been some change, but also sometimes the words don't sit so well. They don't match the Tibetan too well, or certainly I don't use words that have any religious connotation from the Christian culture, because that people that talk about sin, or in the Bodhisattva's way of life, which in another class I'm translating at the moment, one of the translators from some decades ago used the word sinner. And so I rather use the word wrongdoer. This is much easier on the ear than to call the student a sinner. So I put a lot of words, a lot of thought into the vocabulary, and others such as faith. So depa, very common word, but in English, this word carries the meaning of blind faith. So it has the assumption that you're not using your intelligence. So we know in Buddhism, faith, there are different levels. They're usually presented as 3. And the mongde is the blind faith. And this is usually not what's meant. They're usually encouraging one to use one's reasoning and so forth. So if I use the word faith, I will explain that from my side as the translator. But anyway, that's my preparation. I'll also maybe often use another word like trust or conviction, something that in this context feels better. And like that. And I'll also give a lot of thought, like words like love and compassion. The meaning in Dharma is very different from the meaning in society. And of course, wisdom is another. And there's so many like this, because in English, we don't have our Dharma vocabulary. We just have our colloquial vocabulary, unlike Tibetan. So I've put a lot of thought over the years. And like, I don't use renunciation, because in English, this is, you renounce something. It's used often as you renounce something pleasurable for Lent in the Catholic tradition, or because you want to lose weight or something like that. And this isn't the meaning at all in Dharma. It's
use this definite emergence one.
I use definite emergence, yes, which I always have to explain, because it's very few people use it. But definite emergence, then I explain it as it's a mind where you are definite about emerging from the sufferings of samsara. Now that's positive. Whereas renunciation, you'd need to explain it that you're renouncing the sufferings of samsara. But then there's nothing about emerging to liberation or to enlightenment. So definite emergence, it has no real meaning. So therefore the student will, in their mind, will inquire what's he talking about, and then you explain. And then it's got a positive connotation. Whereas renunciation, people often think it's about, I need to give up my chocolate, I need to give up ice cream, and this kind of thinking. And that's not the meaning. The meaning is you giving up attachment to these things. The problem's not the chocolate, the problem's the attachment. So you recognize you need, attachment keeps you bound, but when you've given up the bound to samsara, when you've generated definite emergence, you're definite about emerging from being bound by attachment. So with the explanation, it's positive. Whereas renunciation, it really misses the meaning. So
it really makes total sense, because there are labels, right, that we have in mind in English, and Tibetan words and English words really don't go together well.
Really don't go together. And another great one is wisdom. When you study mental factors, that wisdom is omnipresent. So we always have wisdom accompanying our consciousnesses. That's really strange, because if you have wisdom, it means you're a wise person. And people generally don't identify as wise. But so wisdom, we're kind of stuck with it. But I often will rather use other words like intelligence, or I'll explain that wisdom is much more broad, or something like that, just to help the students understand and get past barriers in their mind from language that doesn't really convey the meaning. Others will be self-cherishing mind. So this misses out the Zinpa, which is so it has this aspect of also grasping. So you cherishing yourself, but you're grasping at yourself as dear.
You're
So I rather
saying about
translate it like that.
Rangqinzi.
Rang Chinsin.
Okay.
So Rang Che is self-cherishing, but there's no Zinpa. So I then say that holding oneself as dear, and the other cherishing, holding others as dear. Just because, especially if the teacher is going to explain the Tibetan vocabulary, if there's no Zinpa, I've got nothing to translate.
Yeah. Well,
So,
it looks like we need a whole new session on the vocab, because it's really
yes,
so
yes.
exciting to hear and so useful.
Yeah. And just to say for the audience, because my heritage is South African, and I lived in the UK for some years, and now I'm in Australia. In different, even within the English speaking world, the words carry different meanings and cultures. So in Australia, I need to learn this a little bit. I haven't found too many difficulties, but this really is an issue. And for those who, I'm not one, but who's translating not into the native language, this is really more of an issue, to understand how in cultures words sometimes carry particular weight. So for example, the mental factor of discrimination, or the aggregate of discrimination. This, as a South African, is an incredibly difficult word to use. And I think for many Westerners too, because discrimination in society is only used for racial discrimination or sexual discrimination. It's only got a negative connotation. So another word like differentiation or discernment, but differentiation works better. So yeah, anyway, so how do I prepare? I give the question. I give a lot of thought to the vocabulary. Now that I've been doing this for some years, I don't really so much, but for the first many years, I chatted to other people here in Australia and got their views on what words to use, etc. So yeah, when I prepare, I prepare the text, matching the English and the Tibetan, writing numbers for the paragraphs, letters for the sentences. I prepare that cheat sheet I showed, and with words that just so under pressure, I can easily call them to mind. And that makes it a lot easier for me whilst translating. And then I give thought to the vocabulary. I also, because I have the time, I read whatever other translations there are of the text and commentaries to it. So like I'm translating Lamrim Chemo for one class, the middle Lamrim for another. So there are many commentaries on the Lamrim. So I read these because I don't only learn the topic, but I learn expressions, way to say things. So where I see a translator's written something really quite beautiful, I'll write that down too. And if the teacher says something like that, I'll use it because it helps deliver the teaching well. So I read well beforehand as well. And then the last thing to mention is just before the class, I always spend time calming my mind, generating motivation. So this is, I think, quite common. But I think it's really important because this gets my enthusiasm up. It also, I try to make my mind very quiet, very spacious, so that, especially for in-person translating, there's, I think, a lot of from in-person translating as opposed to online, I find the intuition is much stronger because I know, because I often listen to the teachings again afterwards. And I listen to the Tibetan and I say, wow, I got so much more in the class than now when I'm listening to it in my room.
Yeah.
And I put that down to the intuition that's coming from the interaction with the Geshe next to you. And I mean, I can't explain it any more than that, but I do try to make my mind as open and receptive to his emotion, because you can feel their emotion, especially when it's something very dear to their heart, bodhicitta, emptiness like this. They glow in a way that they otherwise don't usually
They
when
really
they're
do.
on those topics.
That's true.
So yeah, so this is in the last bit of my preparation is I try to prepare my mind by developing the motivation. Yeah.
What about if you, like, if it's a new teacher, and as we know, Tibetans have so many different accents?
Mm.
Well, an obvious question, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Yes, that's good. And I've been translating for 8 years, and all 8 years has been with one geshe until this year when I started to translate online for a second geshe. And he speaks with a bit of an accent, not a strong accent, but a bit of an accent. And my entire Tibetan life has been around Utsang. And this is all I understand. I've never had, I don't have Kampa friends. I don't have Amdua friends. I've never really had conversations with people from Kampa or Amdo either. I only know one dialect. So this was a challenge. But with time, and now it's been some months, we're in September, so it's been about five months working with him a few times a week. Now I'm much better, but I still make mistakes. The other day, I thought he translated, Geshe-la is going to talk about a prayer he recited last night. So Monlam. And then he starts talking about a dog and about, I thought it was a donkey, but it wasn't. And he taught the dog to prostrate to Manjushri. And I'm thinking, what kind of prayer is this? So I checked, and it wasn't Monlam, it was Milam, it was his dream. Then it makes much more sense. So there with accents still takes some time. But something a much more experienced and skilled translator than me, she advised me before starting to work with the Geshe, because he's here in Australia, to fly up, spend a bit of time with him, and just make a connection. And so that he can get to know you and your level. And you can talk a bit about your translation style and check if he's happy with that, etc. And build a connection with him in person. And because I can, I know you translate for someone in New Zealand, and that's a little bit difficult to fly for a long weekend like I did. But this was very beneficial that I could do that, because then we developed a connection. And connection
That's ideal.
makes a big difference, a really big difference. Yeah. So yeah, the accent thing is a bit difficult, but with time it's got easier. But making the connection in person, this I found very important and very beneficial.
Thank you. Okay. Well, question number 2. What do you do when you miss something? Like, do you continue clarifying until it's 100% clear? And sometimes it really takes long.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So for Dharma teachings, I do. And if I'm just not getting it, what I find the teacher, he always re-explains it with different vocabulary. And so in the end, I get there. So I always do. Or if from his side, he thinks it's beyond me, he says it's okay, and then it's done. Especially for the one that I translate with online with a different accent, he quite easily says let it go, and then let it go. The Geshe I live with and translate for every day, we don't have that problem, so it's always okay. But I always stop and I get it 100%. And also I interrupt them while they're talking if I'm lost. But I may wait to hear a bit more to see if I now work out the context. Because when you know the context, it suddenly all makes sense. Yeah. If you've prepared well, then the context will tell you what they're saying. But otherwise, I will interrupt them and I will tell them up to where I understood. And then they will. The 2 Geshes I've worked with, very kind. They know I'm trying. They know I have my capacity and it's, my limits. And so they're very okay. Where I do it differently is when it's not a Dharma teaching, but it's a public talk. Then for like just a general talk, with giving life advice. So it's just not a class, because then it's not about so much being right and wrong. You're really just talking very generally to people. So there I put more emphasis on the flow. And so that from the audience perspective, they're engaging, because there's, especially in these classes, they're not used to a translator. So there's a very alien thing. And so I don't want to be going backwards and forwards. So unless I'm really not getting it, I will, like this Monlam and Milam, this was a general talk and it just was making no sense. So I had to go back. But otherwise, if I miss something, I let it go. And generally in the general talk, I rather make sure that the flow is there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I had my own funny examples, but it's more connected with the spelling of the word, like papa, right? Or the word topa, which
Dorpa.
with or without the secondary suffix. And sometimes I'm just completely lost whether it's Arya being or a pig, because I've never heard this story. And oh my God, yeah, sometimes I have to re-listen to it again.
Yeah, stories are difficult.
Yeah.
And this really wonderful translator gave me the advice to meet the Geshe and build connection. She's really been translating for maybe 20 years and can translate any accent, very knowledgeable, doesn't need to prepare much with the teacher at all, but she will always sit with him before to hear the stories, so that she knows the story before she translates. So even someone who's light years ahead of me, and not I don't say that with humility, she's very, very good. She even gets the story beforehand. So yeah, these are very
That's
difficult.
good to hear. That's very reassuring. Thank you. Well, the next question is about Sigdel. Like lamas often do the Sigdel, they read the text in Tibetan and translate it into colloquial. But for a foreign audience, everything is already written there in the text. It's so clear. And it kind of becomes a repetition of the text. So what do you do to avoid it? Because it becomes really boring, isn't it?
Yeah, and this happens a lot. And because the Tibetan isn't usually clear, so the teacher makes it clear. But yeah, so I will just repeat it back to the class, and it's done. And it's usually just a single line in a verse and or a sentence in the text. And like that, then it's done. And then the commentary will come. So the students quickly get used to it because, yeah, it is boring, but it's done. And where he says, for example, that this is an honorific word and this is the colloquial, I've got nothing to say. So I have nothing to say. And then I will either omit that entirely, and if he had also, like when he was explaining the word, the line, I'll just omit that entirely. And if that's all he's saying, then I've got all I can say to the students is this is the Tibet, the honorific word for compassion, but we don't have that in English, and it's done. And like this, the one benefit of doing this, the downside is it's a little boring. The benefit is the students have confidence you giving them what the Geshe is saying, and so that's the benefit that comes, and they will know that an explanation will follow in the next segment. So yeah, that's just how it is.
Basically patience, right?
Yeah.
Because I guess some translators would say it in different words, but for example, for myself, as my English is limited, I just don't have other words. So I'll have to say it all over again, basically the same way.
That's a good point. I do this sometimes. In fact, I probably do that quite often, but because it's every class is like this. But like that, it's just quick and it's done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to say on that, where it can get challenging in the preparation when you're translating a verse, is many things are ambiguous. And there was the verse that we're doing this coming week in Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's something along the lines of the Lord of Death comes whether you have done it or not. So Jepa, young men are Majepa. And so what does this refer to? So the commentaries, different commentaries refer to different things. Either you finished your worldly activities or not, or whether you finished your purification or not, because it's in the context of the purification chapter. And so in English, you need to be clear when you're doing a translation. You can't leave it ambiguous. Otherwise, it's just not nice for the reader. And what often happens, I go to, because I live with the Geshe, so it's very easy. And I ask him, how are you going to teach it? He said, I could teach it. Either way is right. And then I said, well, I can only translate in once. I said, well, I'll teach it in either way on the night, maybe both. so what to do? And
Okay.
and then you just flow with it, you know what to do.
Mhm.
So sometimes, and then I may translate it in one way, because this he also does. Oh, I will teach it in this way. So I write it in that way. The students have it in that way. He teaches it in the other. So like this. Then all you can do is explain that to the students, and it's done, you know.
Yeah.
So yes,
Then it adds a little bit of fun also and
yeah, yeah,
re-energizes the audience.
yes. This is true. This is true.
Wonderful. So the next question is about translating. You've already touched this topic before. Maybe you have something else to add. Translating being in Lama's presence versus
Mm,
translating online. What's your
mm.
experience? Which one do you prefer? And so forth.
Yeah, I have no problem doing it online. I was a little nervous at first, but I don't, it's not a preference at all. I don't see, the only benefit is that people can receive teachings that otherwise wouldn't have. But for myself, I find no benefit. It's particular having that connection with the Lama. This is really nice, being next to him and having this heart to heart connection during the translation, where you feel him. Your intuition is feeling him, and this intuition impacts very much my translation. So that's much weaker online. Also, I can see the audience when it's in person. I can't online. And the main benefit of seeing the audience, like I've been at this one Dharma Center for 8 years, when people come, I know if they're new or not. And when it's new people, you need to change your language. They don't know the word Dharma or Buddha Dharma, so you need to use teachings, or the Buddha's teachings. These kinds of simple things. Where if it's online, I have no idea who's there. So then, and this, as the translator, does make a difference, because if you're making it too simple and they experienced students, then for them it's not so nice. But in terms of preparation, no difference. Luckily, for what I've done online, I haven't needed to prepare with a teacher at all. I just ask him, how far is he preparing? Is he going to teach? Because I don't want to prepare beyond that, because it's a big Lamrim Chemo, it's a big text. I need to prepare just what he's going to teach. That's all I ask. So, and if I have a question, I live with another Geshe, so I can ask him. So I don't need to ask the Geshe I work with online and anything beyond how up to what page will he go.
Lucky you.
Yes.
I find it difficult to not being able to see the Lama well. Sometimes it happens online when the connection is not so good and the camera is not close enough. And on top of that, not being able to hear him well, because it's by the microphone, some noises in the background. And I really, it takes much more effort to translate online, because I need to really be, paying a lot of attention. And on top of that, I remember translating, I was on a stage and I was near the Lama, but I couldn't see him clearly because he was on a high throne. And it was an obstacle, because apparently I need to see how he's saying that, like his facial expressions. So for me online, it's quite a challenge.
It makes a big difference. It was yesterday where I was doing this translating online with the story about the dog, and I thought also a donkey, but it wasn't a donkey. And then he went on to talk about, it was a black dog with white fur, and he was pointing here and there. But I'm not so good with Zoom. I couldn't see him. And so I say, I can't see what you're doing. But luckily, one of the students is more like a normal person and could tell me what to do, and I could then see the teacher. But seeing the teacher really makes a big difference, because you can see his gestures. You can see, you can mimic him much more. You can see where, like on a physical level, if he's emphasizing something or showing something. As the translator, I try and do that as well, because the students will see him doing whatever, and they know he's indicating something. And then if I do it too, then that answers that question, and they're feeling more engaged. So, and also they feel that you are giving what the teacher's giving and not your own thing. And that's important. That's important.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And what was that? If it wasn't a donkey, what was that? I'm confused.
It was a chest. It was the chest.
A chest. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Banku as opposed to
Bungo.
bonku.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
like this. So from context, it helps, and the context would have been him pointing at his chest.
Yes.
And but I didn't have the picture at the time, and I thought he was talking about a prayer.
Yeah. A lot of fun being a translator, right?
Mhm.
Oh, so my next question is, well, that's a tricky one. Do you ever add anything to what the teacher says?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, and the honest answer is yes and no. But because we're talking to translators, then I'll be very open. If it was to students, I'd say no, because the students have the expectation, because certainly when I was living in Europe and living with people from all over Europe, many of them spoke several languages. And so they would translate, because I only spoke English. And I was living at the London Monastery in France. So they would translate from another European language into English. And it was very easy for them. You just substitute words and it's done. We know with Tibetan, it's not like that. There is so much more that is required. So the students really expect that what the teacher says, you're just saying those words. And therefore there's concern if he spoke for 2 minutes and you spoke for 2.5. And if you regularly do this, then you're adding. So this is the problem. Or if you speak for 1.5 minutes, then you're not giving everything. So there is the expectation that you only say what the teacher says. So, but now to speak to translators, do I add? Yes and no. So the first maybe point to make to answer this clearly and not to leave confusion is that our job as a translator is to convey what the teacher is communicating. Professional translators are those who, not Dharma translators, but those who work in society. So when they're translating for Tibetans, it's usually legal services to do with immigration lawyers and their refugee claim, or it's for medical appointments. There, you translate what the lawyer said or what the doctor said, and nothing more. And likewise, from the patient or from the Tibetan seeing the lawyer, you only translate what they said. In the Dharma, this is a process of conveying, it's a conversation about psychology. So you can't only communicate the naked words. You have to communicate the subtext behind the words, the emotion with which the teacher is expressing himself. So my job as a translator is to convey what the teacher is communicating. And when he communicates through choosing specific words, which in Tibetan, it's not so clear. There's a lot of very general words, sangpo and this kind of thing, lekpa. But for myself, I'm very clear with my choice of vocabulary to convey what I understand his emotion to be. And so when I'm translating what he's communicating, I do this both through his words, but also the way he's expressing them. Because before I spoke Tibetan, I was speaking with a translator, and I said, so when Geshe, sometimes he talks in a higher pitched voice, does that higher tone, does that have any meaning? And he explained to me, he's expressing more emotion then. So like by compassion or whatever. And that I found very interesting because I didn't understand about translating at all. So through tone and this kind of thing, the teacher is expressing a lot. And if I'm only giving the words, that doesn't happen. So I need to ensure that the flavor of what the teacher is saying, the emotion, is conveyed. So how then? So then this really comes to how I say what he's saying, because there's an explicit meaning and an implicit meaning. So I've had this conversation with the teachers I work with. So there is this understanding that and that they are in agreement that I must both be factually accurate with what they're saying. So I say his words, but I also convey the sentiment of what he's saying. Because where I've listened to, especially live translation, but also in person, sequential translation, very often translators, they very focused on being precise, and that's all. And the teaching's very dry. And this is quite difficult in simultaneous translation, because you're having to be very fast to keep up. And you're translating what was said 30 seconds ago, etc. So I've never done that. And that I think is much more difficult. But where the teacher talks, and then a moment later I talk, I can convey his emotion. And this is a very different experience for the students. So this I really make a lot of effort in. So in this way, I don't want to say I add, because I don't add, but I don't only say the naked words, I convey the flavor. With this, I also will make quite a few changes, in the sense of I will often change the order of what he says. If there's an illustration, an example, I may put it at the beginning, I may put it at the end. I prefer, if there's something negative and something positive, to end on something positive. And often the teacher puts the negative thing on the end, but I rather have the teaching positive, so I do it like that, because this is how I'm conveying the emotion. So changing like that, because we know in written translation, you always change the word order. And every even spoken sentence in Tibetan, you're changing the word order. So you have that license. And then, so I change the order of what's said. This I do freely. Also, I use emotive language. So I'll use, and this then could be adding words, but not adding meaning, but to convey the emotion. Because this is important, not to make it dry and boring. When the teacher is talking from his heart, the students need to have those words touch them. And then also where I'd be adding is I would sometimes bring in the context. So just to remind the students of where we are in the broader outline, so that just to remind them that we are talking about the bodhisattva paths, and in particular path of preparation, because they may have, the teacher would have said that, but several segments before. So I may need to bring it in, or link it to, if he's saying something that he said a few weeks ago and he's re-emphasizing it now, I will say that to remind the students. And what I also do, which my teacher here started to copy because he sees me do it, is where he's giving, in particular, say, meditation steps, that you first meditate on this, secondly, you meditate on that, third, you meditate on that. I will add those numbers. He started to do that now sometimes, but for students, this is very nice, because then it's clear this is a sequence. Otherwise, they're just getting information. So I will always add numbering where it's relevant like that. And then there are times when I very clearly add something and I will say so. So if I feel an English expression conveys the meaning, then I will use that, but I will add something like, in English, we express this as. And I think that makes it clear that this is coming from the translator. Because once in a private interview, I used some English expression, but I didn't say that. And the students asked me afterwards, do they really say that in Tibetan? And it's just an English colloquialism. So of course not. So I always will say that. Or I will say something like, now to add something from the translator's side. And then it's very clear I'm adding something. And this will usually be about words, like the meaning of the words. So to say something from the translator's side, this word wisdom has a far broader meaning. And so here it's better understood as intelligence. So I'll be using both intelligence, but sometimes wisdom, but just to know, it's what you know usually as wisdom. So then I'm making it very clear I'm adding something. So in this way, I feel ethically fine. I'm not teaching. And this for me is very clear. I am helping the teacher teach, but I'm not the teacher, but I am teaching, but I'm not the teacher. That's a better way to say it. And why I say I'm teaching is because I'm expressing the accuracy of what he's saying, but also the emotion. So this is how they get it. They get it through me, but I'm not the teacher. And therefore, if I feel if a better example comes to mind for me, obviously I don't say that. So like this.
That's a very important question. Well, can you say then something on the balance between translating what the teacher really said and conveying the meaning of what he said?
Yeah. This for me, this is like a key component of the ethics of a translator. And it's not something we covered in our course, but this is something I've given some thought to, because it's when you're talking to students, just generally, or talking to your Dharma friends, they'll talk about, I heard His Holiness say, I read Lama Tsongkhapa say. They're reading the translator, or they heard the translator, but they're quoting the Dalai Lama. So I don't translate for the Dalai Lama, but the point is the same, that people take if it's a written translation or a spoken translation, this is what the original says. But it's really me. So if I'm getting it wrong, or I'm adding something in there, this really isn't nice. Because then when they're quoting Geshe-la, they're quoting me. And so they really need to be quoting Geshe-la. So there is this one side that I always keep in mind in terms of the ethics of what I'm doing. So this is maybe a good analogy that I hope will make it clear. I'd see as what comes from Geshe-la as a drawing, just a drawing, like it's a drawing. So it's just a pencil, and it's a lovely drawing. I'm adding the color, because they don't get the color. From the mere words, all you get is the pencil drawing. So by adding the color, which is also the teacher's expressing, but not so much the words. So when you use pause for emphasis, like I just did, or you can talk a lot faster to convey some excitement. So this is all from my side. I can be aping him, copying him, but I can also be doing it from my side to convey the emotion. So that you can say is adding, because I'm bringing numbering, and you will use hand gestures because it apparently helps the students. I will change my pace. I may change my tone and talk a little quieter or a lot louder with some excitement. So in this way, I'm not giving them exactly what the teacher did, but I'm conveying the emotion, the meaning behind what he's saying.
Wow. It looks like all the translators actually need to be actors to some extent, because you really have to engage the audience with the teacher. Yeah.
And where I heard that the first time was when, on our course, it was Bill McGee. He came and gave a talk from his experiences translating. And he said, before he became a translator, where as a young man, he he was an actor, but not a professional, not a professional actor, just like a hobby. And so he learned how to perform. And he takes translating as a performance, and he encouraged us to do so. And that really made me think. And I've come to see that there really is truth in that there is this component of performance. Because I watched a TED talk on communication, and they showed how when the audience and the speaker are in sync, their brain waves match. And what primarily gets them in sync is that they are drawn in and they're really engaged. And they engage with emotion. So where we can also see this is with skilled politicians. They talk with emotion. They may be factually completely lying, but they're engaging their audience. And you come away from this so inspired. And these are very dangerous politicians. But also when the students leave the class and they've been touched, their heart has been touched, then as a translator, I think I did the right thing, because I'm sitting there and the teacher's touching my heart. And now I'm conveying that to them. And so right at the beginning, in answer to the first question, I mentioned I put a lot of effort into preparing so that when the teacher's teaching, I'm not needing to think much about the meaning of what he's saying. I'm not thinking, what does this word mean, or what is the context? I've prepared, this is easy. So I'm thinking about what to say and how to say it. So I type my notes. So if I get, oh, this is a beautiful way to express it, I'll type that sentence and then read that sentence off. And because the emotion that has arisen within me while I'm connecting with the Lama, this is what I want to convey. So this is most of my thought process in the translation, is how to convey what's being said. And I can do that because I understand him very easily, the topic I've prepared, so then I can give a lot of thought to what I'm saying, and not sorry, how I'm saying it. Yeah, how I'm saying
I see.
it.
Well, you mentioned something on ethics of a translator. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, that's such a good thing, because I read about a translator course online, and one of the topics was ethics, and that surprised me. And then I didn't do the course because it was for this legal and medical stuff, and this I won't ever do. But I read about, I thought then a lot about what ethics means. So to tie back firstly to just what we're covering, so I need to be accurate in terms of the words and the illustration and all this kind of thing. But I have to also convey the meaning. And this is, for me, the artistry of translating, in particular oral translating. And written translating, you're more confined to the words on the page. But oral translation, because you've really got the Lama's connection, his heart being expressed, and you need to then convey that. So to keep this balance. And then also in terms of ethics, when I'm adding, I make this very clear. And I know for the student side, that gives them confidence that I heard someone say this many years ago about another translator. Their suspicion was that translator was a frustrated teacher and that he adds a lot. And I have no idea, didn't speak Tibetan. And this is something I've always kept in mind, because the person who said it, I respect her greatly. So I don't ever want to have that accusation validly posited against me. So I always try to be accurate. But with this accuracy, you also need to convey the meaning. So I remember, I'm not the teacher. However, it's my job to bring across his emotion. And when I can see in the audience that their heart is also being touched like mine is, then I know I've done this well. But also on ethics, what also helps keep me accurate is, I guess for all the translators these days, everything's on YouTube, even the in-person stuff. And I know some people who'll be watching speak Tibetan. And therefore, I must remember, and I have translated before Tibetans. And so you've got to always have that in mind, that there will be people who understand you, and who understand the Tibetan rather. And therefore, you got to not stray away, but you've got to convey the emotion, but be accurate and true to the teacher. So this helps me as well. And another thing to say on ethics is when you do interviews where students or a group of students come to see the teacher, it's so important that you keep their confidence, that you will hear things which are a bit shocking. You know, people will come and talk about very personal things, and these you have to keep to yourself, even if they make great stories. You know, because also people come and talk crazy things, and these make great stories. You can make people laugh afterwards. But if you get that reputation, you then have created a barrier to students coming to see the teacher, because they won't trust you as a translator. So you have to keep confidence, even if for whatever reason you see purpose in repeating something you heard in private. This I think is unethical. So there you have to keep confidence in interviews, and also especially if you physically work with a teacher. So in my case, I live with him, so therefore I translate for him in all circumstances. So every time he goes to the doctor, I'm there, which means you know things about the teacher, and also you live with him, so you know about him in a way that no one does. And he also will talk very openly with you about his views on things. whether situations in the world or what things that have been asked in class or whatever it may be. And there, I think the ethics is imperative that you keep his confidence. So if, for example, people know we went to the doctor, and we go to the doctor time to time, it's not a big deal. And they ask me, and they know he's diabetic, and they'll ask me, how is his diabetes? I'll say, rather you ask the teacher, it's not my place to say. And it's not a big deal because his diabetes is fine. But if I would say his diabetes are fine, and then eventually it's not, what to do? Because it's not my business to say that. I need to keep his confidence. And also if he's giving his views on a decision that has been taken by the managers, then if I let anyone know that, I'm breaking his confidence. And then he won't trust me. He won't speak openly to me. And then that friendship is also harmed. So with confidentiality, this, I think, towards the students and then towards the teacher in these two different ways is really important and part of ethics. Yeah. And then the last thought on this is what's really important is to keep harmonious relationships with everyone, especially where you're residential or you translate in person. And where I have not got involved in the center and the politics and decisions, things have gone much better, because then you have harmonious relationships with people. What I think would be a mistake is if I were to get involved in other areas where you have responsibility. So not like, I don't know, helping the kitchen, this is fine. But if I were to get on the board, or I was to take responsibility for a project and be a leader with people working with me, because as soon as you're needing to make decisions and say yes to some and no to others, your relationships with others change and they get frustrated with you, annoyed with you. Then when they're sitting in class, the way they see you now is a bit colored, a bit tainted by these other interactions. And this creates a barrier between them and the teacher. Or if you just don't like someone, you don't get on with them, whatever it may be, you need to be really careful to keep harmonious relationships. So I think there's a lot to be said for being friends with everyone, but close friends with no one. Being friendly with everyone, but not being close with anyone. Because if you're close with some, you're going to hear from them the gossip about the others. And then how you see them will change. And then those that you're close to, they will know things about you, which they may gossip with others. And then others have an impression of you. And in these ways, you're creating a barrier for how they access the teacher. So that if they're sitting in the class and having negative thoughts to me, this impacts on how they're receiving the teaching. So this is, I think, much more difficult to keep because we like to have friendships and this kind of thing. But it's just worth mentioning. But the other two about respecting the Geshe's confidence and the student's confidence, this is much easier. This is very clear and easier to do. Even if you get interesting stories and make people laugh, this isn't good. And then the other thing about in the teaching itself, the ethics of you not embellishing, but where you are adding, what you're really doing is bringing across the meaning. You aren't adding, you're bringing across the meaning. And so, like I said, I keep in mind that there will be Tibetan speakers listening, or there will be. And if I were to see myself translating differently in front of a Tibetan speaker, then I know I've really let myself down on the ethics side. So, yeah.
So what you're saying, it sounds to me like it's more relevant to those who live in Dharma centers in terms of harmonious relationship with everyone.
Yes.
And not being friendly, but not being friends, right? So it looks like you're saying that basically a translator is a friend with a Geshe rather than with anyone else. So what about the harmonious relationship with a Geshe? Do you have anything to add here?
Yeah. I'll talk from my experience, and I'm incredibly fortunate, this Geshe is the kindest, gentlest guy, and incredibly stable. He's incredibly stable. Shantideva talks about being a plank of wood, and he's like this. He's as stable as a plank of wood. If I were to tell him that I'd won the lottery, or if I were to tell him that my mother had died, his reaction would be the same. He's incredibly stable. And so he's very easy to live with. And he's also very aware of me and that I'm not like him. And I'm a normal person, attachment and anger and all these things. So he's very conscious of that. So I have a very easy life with him. And not all translators have this. And especially that we live together. It's just the two of us in our apartment. If we didn't get on, it would be dreadful. So very lucky. But so that being said, I've heard many stories from translators who really don't like their Geshis. And living with a Geshi, when Geshis come and visit and they talk, I'm there. I've heard many stories from Geshis who really don't like their translators. And here I think, and I say this with the background that it's easy for me to say because I live with someone who's very easy to live with. But in the same way, if the people listening to this have had either close friendships or romantic relationships with someone from a different culture, you know that people see and experience the world and events and have their views on things are very different because of their cultural perspective. And you can't really often say that one perspective is more valid than the other. And when you think about it from the perspective of dependent arising, how these perspectives came in the individual, you really see that's all it is. So the advice I give here is really to try and be as open as you can, open-minded as you can, to just a different cultural way of seeing things. And therefore, if they act in a different way, it's not a big deal. Don't make it into a big deal. And rather focus on the bigger picture, which is, if I have a good relationship with this teacher, and most translators don't live with their teacher, so this is relevant, especially then, because it's much easier if you don't live with him. If I have a good relationship with him, that from my side, I'm genuinely respectful and like him, the students benefit from that. And because they will pick this up, we've had this, well, I've had this feedback a lot from the students, that they see the close connection between us, that we're not just teacher and student, but we're friends. So they see this and they appreciate that. Whereas I've heard from other translators that they despise their teacher. I know of one who's worked for 20 years with the same Geshe. He wouldn't look at him. He would look at the students because he really didn't like the Geshe at all. And I was never in that audience, but I can just imagine that how that felt for students, you know, the energy in the room. But if you can generally deal with your mind as well as you can, be open and accepting different culture, different way of seeing things, different way of talking, that they may talk in a particular way that you find offensive, doesn't mean it was meant as offensive. Just relax your mind, and then you can continue to have a good view of him for the sake of the students. Then it's, I think, if one can do that, then even the more difficult times, you know, it can be easy. And I say this again just to emphasize, both the Geshis, also the online one, they never scold me, they never embarrass me, and other Geshis and Rinpoches do this. And they may not mean to, but they will point the finger, they will raise the voice, they will laugh because you don't understand something. And I've never experienced this. But if one does, one needs to deal with it as skillfully as you can, maybe talk to the Geshe, but try to keep a decent attitude for the sake of the students.
Yeah, as a person who is often in the audience listening to somebody translate, I can really feel, especially when both the teacher and the student respect each other, or the teacher and the translator respect each other, you can really feel it. and it's so, and on top of the actual topic being so nourishing for the heart, it's this mutual understanding and respect that really fills you with so much, I don't know, gratitude that you are there, that you're witnessing it. It's very important.
Now, this is my feeling exactly. And because with both the teachers I work for, especially the one I live with, that I have such a close connection, then I believe that when he's teaching, I get so much more of the meaning, and it really touches my heart. And therefore I have more to share. Where if I was sitting there being annoyed with them, or if I was sitting there being annoyed, precious human rebirth again, translated this topic so many times. If I've got any kind of negative thought arising, this becomes an obstacle. What I want is only wholesome minds to share with the audience. I don't want any of my own nonsense going on. So I need to take care of myself. So having a good connection makes everything easy.
I find it difficult sometimes when I have tremendous respect to the teacher and I see how deeply he understands the topic and how really deeply he teaches on that, so that my heart is just, swollen with love and compassion, and so inspiring what he says. I realize that I'm not at the same level. I'm far away from this level. And how do I convey what he's saying? So even though I respect him and he respects me, and I still feel sometimes helpless because I cannot convey 100% of what he's saying, even though I do my best.
Now that's a great point. So to answer that in general, in the very first question when you asked me about preparation, a key motivation to prepare well is the Geshe can only share what he knows, but he can also only share to the level of the translator. And this I've experienced at residential courses where translators are a change. And you see that same class dropping when there's a different translator, and then rising again when the other one comes back. So the more I've prepared, I know the more he can give. But also he'll only give as much as the students can take. But at least if I know from my side I've done my best, then that's okay. And so I'd say then directly to you, if you can say, I've done my best, then that's all that can be done. And it's how it is. And another translator expressed it like this, it's a bit more dismissive. Well, the students have, and he's a good translator, but the students have the karma to have me as a translator. So if they don't like it, they must look at their own karma.
That's a good thing to keep in mind. Thank you. Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
But if you're sitting there and saying, I prepared as well as I could, then it's like that, then it's like that.
I also find motivation in the beginning before the teaching helps a lot. Kind of it changes. Something is changed in the mind. And even the words, sometimes I find myself saying words which I never ever use. And all of a sudden they just come up. I guess,
that makes sense to me, because you've opened yourself. My understanding is you've opened yourself. You're being touched by the meaning that he's conveying. And this is coming out now in how you're expressing.
Oh, what a topic. Okay, so the next question, we still have quite a few. So bear with us, those who are listening to this. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I do. So the next question is, what should a good Dharma center provide for a translator? Like ideal conditions, like salary, benefits, preparation sessions, both are online or offline, on-site translators.
What I've seen in the centers I've been to with residential translators is you get looked after very well. On a material level, you have somewhere really nice to live, and on a material level, it's really good. So if one is able to work on a residential level, your living conditions will be comfortable. And I've seen this in a number of different centers. Salary is always an issue. And as an ordained person, it's really hard. You can't. I don't feel comfortable talking about it. And you take what you're given, and beyond this, as an ordained person, I feel I can't really say anything. But also, I'm residential, so I have somewhere. I live for free. I don't pay for my food, so I don't have many reasons to complain. But in terms of the people listening, I really don't know what to say. It's certainly on the money side, I'm very uncomfortable with that. Dharma is something we need to freely give, and we should do so. But there's the responsibility from the side of the center management to know that people need to live a life and have financial security. And in particular, where you're in a country like in Australia, you're well looked after. So if I continue to live here and I become old here, I get a pension and all this kind of thing, I live for free, everything's very easy. But for people who aren't in that kind of culture, so I'm from South Africa, if I were to be translating there, the government's unable to care for you. You have to have your own money, otherwise you're on the street. And centers need to be aware of this. And also translators, we may often move around, and therefore we may end up not being settled at the time of retirement or whatever. Or be needing to pay for our own medical things, especially, depending on people's different circumstances. So the difficult side is the center needs to be responsible with money. But I don't know what they pay center staff, the few who are paid, but Geshis get very little. And I know center staff complain about the translators who come for teaching events. This is going back to years ago before I was a translator, and a translator would come and translate for a visiting Rinpoche, and he would ask for 200 euros a session, and the center would be really unhappy, but they'd have no choice. They say, we're paying you so much more than the teacher, etc. But this particular translator had kids. He had, this was his job. So it's really difficult. So I don't know what to say on this. I find it difficult to talk about. So I don't really have much to say on the salary side. But certainly what I know most get would not be called a salary, but a stipend, like good pocket money. But yeah, like this. But in terms of preparation, this is a little more challenging. Luckily, the Geshe I live with, whatever time I need, I'm given. And in the early days, I needed a lot of time with him. We started with difficult topics, and he would teach me again and again, and I would record it and listen to it again and again. Now, for years, I do need nothing other than with a written translation. But other Geshis, they have a very busy life, and they don't have time for the translator. And quite frankly, as a translator, you're then just stuck. But luckily, I didn't have that problem. But one key point to make, because this will come as a surprise for new translators, if you do prepare the class with the teacher, don't expect then when he teaches the class to teach what he taught you in the preparation. He will give what he feels like giving in the class. And how I've had this explained to me is that the teacher looks at the class. If they have clairvoyance, they'll be using that, and they will guide the class by the audience. And therefore, what you did in your preparation, that was for you. This is now for the students. So I say that because it will be surprising. You're preparing in one way, and now you got a class. It's not necessarily that different. It's the same verse, the same topic, but it's not what you prepared. So like that. And like I mentioned earlier in the talk was, when doing a written translation and something's ambiguous, and the Geshe says he'll teach it in one way, and then in the class he teaches it in another. And then like that, what to do? So you just do what you can. So that's a point to make. And then maybe the last point I have for this is, if you're residential, it's imperative that it's in your contract before you come that you are coming as the translator and only as a translator, because very often they will look at you and say, you're only translating for like teachings 4 hours a week, 4 hours, but we're paying you a salary. You're living here. You now need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this.
Plus
But you,
numerous hours of preparation who no
and
one
this they
counts.
don't see. And this they don't see. So like I would get the question, what do you do up there all day? I'm preparing. I told you at the beginning, I do a lot of things for my preparation. They don't see this. So therefore, all they see is, because they think, like if you're translating from German into English or French into German, you take the words, you swap them one for the other, make it one or two other changes, and it's done. It's not like that, as everyone watching this video knows. So also, even when you do have time, that's fine. You need to be in that class with energy, with enthusiasm, with your mind on the class, not distracted from all these other things you have done. So on the teaching days, I make sure my mind is very relaxed because I'm not busy with anything else. And then I can give more and give better. So this needs to be clear from the outset. You're coming there as a translator, nothing else. Later, when you have more time, because as you get more skilled, more experience, you have much more time. Like now I do 2 jobs. I could never do this before. But with more experience, everything's just easier. And then you can take on other things, but not for the first years.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, the next question is, should a translator be charismatic, trying to entertain the audience? You also touched this topic before. Or be invisible. And what I mean by that is sometimes lamas are really charismatic, like they're making jokes, they're laughing, and engaging the audience in their own way, but the audience doesn't understand them, right? And so do you try to act the same way, or are you just being yourself? Or sometimes it's the opposite, right? When the lama is very calm and kind of with an even voice is explaining something, and you can clearly see that the audience could be a little bored if you do the same thing. So what do you say about the charisma of a translator?
Yes. So with this, I've heard different things. Many years ago, before I spoke Tibetan, we had a superb translator from Asia, and we were in Europe. And this translator, highly qualified and really excellent, but had a very subdued demeanor, very respectful towards the teacher. Looked at the teacher to translate, never looked at the audience, was always quiet and humble like this the whole time. And many in the audience complained because they weren't getting an interaction from the translator. And I looked at that and I thought it's probably just a cultural difference. So I've never lived and worked in East Asia, so I don't know, but I'd imagine so. Because you see with East Asian students, they tend to be very respectful before the teacher. So this, I think, is what they were doing. So and then I also, when I was new here and I wasn't sure how to present myself, my thinking was to be invisible, because no one came to see me. They all came to see the Geshe. But I felt that the students wanted some interaction from me. They also wanted to connect with me. And then, so I started watching online courses and this kind of thing. And the advice which I've tried to do is people want to see you engage with them. But also, I marry this, though, with advice I had from a highly respected translator some years ago. What he said is, you as a translator need to mirror the teacher. The Geshe he was translating for, very charismatic. Apparently, he would always start off at the back of the cushion on the throne and end up right at the front. And as the class went, and he was very enthusiastic, moving very, very forward. So the translator emulated this, and he showed a lot of energy. He then started translating. He left there and started translating for another Rinpoche. And this Rinpoche was very subdued. And he said, so now he translated in a very subdued manner. Because the students, if they see the teacher going around like this, and the translator is very subdued, it's a mismatch. And they'll get the feeling they're missing something. Likewise, if the teacher is very subdued, but the translator is full of life, again, they'll think this isn't sitting well. There's maybe something being added or whatever. So I think, so the approach I take then is I mirror the teacher. And the teacher I live with here, luckily we have very similar personalities. He's quite serious and this kind of thing, very few jokes. The one online, I have to be a lot more alive because he's full of jokes and very engaging with the audience. So I try to mirror as best I can, because I think I'm getting across the message that you can rely that what I'm communicating is what the teacher is communicating. And then they have trust in the Dharma teaching that they're receiving. So like that. So I try and mirror the teacher, and how I try to interact is I come in and I at least smile at the audience, and I leave and I say goodbye and smile at the audience. So at least at the beginning and the end, I'm not ignoring them. I'm acknowledging them, and I'm doing so in a warm manner. And in the teaching, you can't do this online, but in person, I try and look at the people and make some contact. I'm not really seeing them. I don't know if you've had this experience when you're in person, but I'm so in my head that I don't see the people. And this was very apparent when I was new. I developed the habit of counting the number of students while we were doing the prayers and looking around to see who I recognized, because I'd leave there and I wouldn't know if there was 1 or 10 or 20 people. I'd have no idea. I was so in my head. So you're looking, but you're not seeing. And this was very interesting to see how the mind works. Now it's not so much because I've much more experience, but at first it was really like this. So I try and look around and engage in that way. It's artificial because I'm making myself do it. But from what I've learned, this is what people appreciate, that they're feeling some interaction and connection.
I personally, I have those moments when I'm completely in my mind and I'm looking, but I'm not seeing. But I think most of the time I do see, and I really try to look at least once at everyone. I mean, the audience is not so big, right? So it's not like 1,000 people.
Yes.
If it is 1,000 people, I don't think I'm even looking at the audience, because I had this experience before. It was really scary.
Yeah.
So I was looking somewhere way back or at the teacher. But yeah, if it is like a small audience, I try to look at everyone to make sure like there is this connection. And I think it's actually nice towards the audience when they feel that they're acknowledged, maybe that they're there for the translator, for the teacher, because teacher really looks at them. Most of the teachers do. Some teachers actually teach with their eyes closed, right? But the majority do look, and I think it's good to make this connection. Eye contact is important.
Now, this is my understanding as well. And what I've also found effective is when like a key point is being made. If you at that moment can make eye contact with a student, that key point will touch them, because it's as if the teacher was saying it to them. It's difficult to do because many students close their eyes or they're looking around, their mind has wandered off. But when one can do that, then you've touched them in that moment, and this is really beneficial.
Yeah.
So yeah. But for this point in general, I really try to mirror the teachers to the extent I can. Ape his mannerisms. So where I notice on the point he's doing something or showing something, then I will do the same. He may be pointing at a book, then I point at the book or whatever it may be at that same point, because the students, I think, expect that. Then they get confidence that you really are giving what the teacher said.
Yeah. I also, when I translate online, this is something I kind of try to develop in myself. Just like you look at the audience when you're on site, you can look at the camera, right? Because it gives the same feeling that the translator is looking at you. It's
Yeah.
difficult to remember, though, to keep in mind,
Yeah.
but I sometimes try to do it. Unlike now, like we're talking, I'm not looking at the camera at all, looking at you, but yeah, I think it makes the difference.
Yeah, no, that's a good advice, and I really don't do that because with my setup, just below the camera is the Geshe's face, and it's really big just because of the screen, and it's a little startling for me. But maybe I should change my setup a little bit because it is preferred for the students. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, next question is about the bridges, those cultural and linguistic bridges, differences of the teacher and the audience. How do you deal with that when translating?
Yeah, this is quite interesting in that, tying back to something that I was saying right at the beginning with preparation, think about vocabulary. What I really try to do is not use, as far as I can, overly technical language that is alien from English. So earlier I was talking about words like faith and love and wisdom, which have a different meaning in English. But here, in Buddhism, in the Buddhism, the Geluk Buddhism, they often use quite technical language, talking about the object and the object possessor, and the object of meditation. And this confused me for so long. And if it confused me, then I assume others were confused. So now I may use the word, but I will always explain it. The object of meditation is whatever the topic is you are meditating on. And because then it means something. And I stay away from object possessor. This is just terrible. I mean, it's what the Tibetan says, but I'll talk about consciousness or I'll talk about mind, just to what the mind, the mind that is meditating on love or compassion or whatever. So I try where I can to make the language understandable and not so technical. And otherwise it can, especially like be for a closed community, trying to remember. I remember when I was very new in the word, I was thinking bodhisattva and bodhicitta. What's the difference? I couldn't remember. And so I remember this now 30 years later. And that's how it is when you're very new. So I try and explain words as I'm going, where they're new people. But another thing, though, in terms of the cultural difference in linguistics, is the way Westerners and Tibetans think and therefore phrase questions is vastly different. Questions are so often, they ask the question, and within that, they now present possibilities. Here's the question, and so it could be like this, or it could be like that. And if it's like that, then it has this consequence. So they ask all these things. I don't translate that. I take all of what they said and I repeat back to the student just the question. And then that is all I say to the teacher. The teacher doesn't need to hear the Dharma understanding of the student. The teacher needs to answer the question. Because what I found before I was a translator is so often the answer from the Geshe didn't match the question.
Yes. And
you're sitting there as in the audience, whether you ask the question or not, and you think, no connection. And this is because, in my opinion, as the translator, if that is the case, I didn't ask the question clearly, or sometimes also I don't know what the student's on about, so I have to ask them. This is why I repeat back to them, just to make sure I know what they're on about. And then if the Geshe understands it, he will answer it. And what I also do with questions is, again, with the cultural difference, I will have a guess, an inclination that behind their question is a lot more meaning. So when I'm, as the translator, giving from the Geshe, this is what I try and convey with word usage and the way it's said, with cadence and pauses and emphasis and these kinds of things. But where I'm picking up that there is meaning behind what is said, I will say this to the Geshe, but I'll first give him the question, and then I will say, but I think they mean this. So I'm making it very clear to the Geshe this is the question, but I think they mean that. So therefore, if he agrees, or as he usually would, he would then answer what I'm saying I think they mean. And this seems to work very, very well. And we've almost never get the student coming back and saying, if I say to them, did that answer the question? They'll almost never say no. So like that. So in this way, I try to get the two to match. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important question. I mean, it's one of the most difficult things to translate. Yeah. Well, first of all, translating back into Tibetan, right?
Yeah.
And then really match the way of thinking, which is unmatchable. Basically, you cannot. So you're doing your best to convey the meaning.
And especially if you teach, working with a teacher who's new with Westerners, this way of thinking is very different. And also, if as a translator, I'm not also making clear how words are used differently, like feeling in Buddhism is used very differently in English. It's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Happiness, suffering, or neutral. This is not how we use it in English, you know. So if the student understands that, the question's clearer. But when I put the question to the Geshe, I make sure I'm asking the meaning as well, the meaning of what the person, not just the words, the person is saying, not just the words.
Thank you. Well, the last question for today, but it feels like we need another session of questions and answers. So many translators struggle with maintaining the level of language they acquired when they studied, for example, like we studied in Dharma, and after a few years, especially myself, I wasn't living with Tibetans. I felt like I'm losing Tibetan to some extent. And now, let's say my understanding of Tibetan is better than speaking, and it used to be kind of the same. So do you have any suggestions on how to maintain the level of language, or do we even need to maintain it?
Yeah, this I don't have good solutions, but this really is an issue. The only solution I know, but it's very limited, is I've been living with Tibetan since 2010. So this is now my 14th year. And so my spoken language at home for 14 years has been Tibetan. In this way, my Tibetan's improved. But if I didn't have this, it would be impossible. And also, many translators who live with their Geshe, they aren't necessarily close with the Geshe. They may have a teacher-student relationship, but even then, I have a friendship with the Geshe. We talk together. If he wants to go out, I'll take him to walk around the lake and we chat. We eat together, so we watch the news when we eat, and I translate the news and we discuss these things, you know, so we talk a lot. And in this way, my Tibetan has improved. And when I meet Tibetan friends I haven't seen for years, they're always a little surprised that it's less bad than it was. Other than this, I don't know a solution. One can talk to friends on WeChat, but that's not like living in the community like you did in Dharamsala. You can listen to teachings in Tibetan, and this is important, but it doesn't help the speaking. So with myself, I've seen a real problem, is that to be able to understand, you need to hear a lot. To be able to understand well, you need to hear a lot. To speak well, you need to speak a lot. And for 14 years, my speaking has always been colloquial. And even though I've been living with this Geshe for 8 years, I ask him Dharma questions, but I ask a question, and then he gives me paragraphs of answers. So I get very little practice of speaking Dharma Tibetan. Therefore, I remember very little Dharma Tibetan. When I'm hearing it, it's easy because I know the context, I remember all the words. But to speak Dharma Tibetan, it's just embarrassing. It's really bad. And this is because my training in India was similar to now, when do you speak a lot of Dharma to someone as their teacher? And I don't have this relationship with Tibetans. I'm no one's teacher. So this is a real problem. And now for all these years, my spoken Dharma is very poor. Those Westerners who've debated, they don't have this problem at all because they've spoken a lot of Dharma Tibetan. So for them, it's very easy. I'm not like this. But my colloquial is easy because I speak it all the time, because I live with Tibetan. Not doing that, I know it would be lost. And so I don't know a good solution, unfortunately.
Well,
But
lucky you.
it's needed.
I rejoice in the opportunity that you have.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
find
that is true.
watching the teachings helps, not only in terms of understanding, but somehow it's like, for bilingual children to become bilingual, they watch the cartoons in the target language.
Mhm.
And it really works somehow for the mind. It's like it kind of sinks into the unconscious, and you find it easier to find expressions and words, and it's like it has an interesting effect, but it's not the same as being around Tibetans every day.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
and I think what you've identified there is the solution. You watch teachings, and there I found I listen to my own teachings, my own where I'm translating. One, I really like the teachings, so I'm happy to hear them again. Two, I get to hear myself translate, which at first was really weird, but then you learn how to express yourself better. I was seeing, for example, I was putting emphasis in the wrong places in sentences, so I had to be more cognizant of that, etc. And then you learn and you improve as a translator. But also you're hearing that same teaching again from a geshe you understand, and then this I found helpful for my Tibetan. So yeah.
Yes. Well, that you mentioned that you listen to yourself translating. I have heard it from you, I don't know, for many years, right? And I think it's only now that I can really do that, because it's been so embarrassing for the last few years. I cannot bear listening to myself. And on the other hand, it's really helpful to understand where you make mistakes, where you kind of lose attention and so forth. So it's a
No,
great thing.
absolutely. For me, it was very difficult at first, but then you do it, you get used to it, because it is completely bizarre. It is completely bizarre, but like that, it's okay. I don't ever watch video, mainly because our monastery is in the forest, so I'm walking in the forest, I'm listening to teachings, so it's just audio. But I think if I had to look at myself, then I'd find that weird, because I like now on the Zoom, I've hidden my picture, because you're just not used to seeing yourself, especially in movement.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, probably I should be listening to the recordings rather than watching them. Well, thank you so much for dedicating so much time. Well, actually, one tiny last question. Are you still nervous before every teaching, or does it fade? Because I am every single time.
It fades, but it's not gone. If I prepared well, I'm really okay. But when something changes and I'm out of my comfort zone, it's back. I started translating with the new Geshe, who I didn't understand well. The first time was in person when I went up to meet him. And when they picked me up in the airport, they said, "Oh, and you're translating tomorrow." And so, oh, okay, like this, big surprise. But anyway, it was good, because then you deal with those fears. And I was terrible. I wasn't understanding him because I was nervous. And that took a while. Also, for a long time, each time we started a new text with the same Geshe down here, same Geshe, but it was a new text. How's he going to teach it? And he teaches it like every time. So after the first session, it's fine. Before the first session, I'm nervous. Have I prepared enough? How's it going to go? But now that's gone. Now that's within the comfort zone. But for example, I've never translated an initiation. And if I had to translate an initiation, I imagine I would be nervous, because it's outside the comfort zone. And the one set of teachings I had to do in front of a large group of people, then again I was nervous because suddenly now it was, I think, 400 people, and that took a lot of far better Tibetan speakers in front of me, translators. There was a Geshe who speaks fluent English, a fabulous translator, and that Geshe is also a friend of my teacher. I know they will be giving feedback. So yeah, I was quite nervous, but you calm down and you get a bit stronger next time. So anyway, for myself, I eventually got over it, but it took quite a while. But when I'm out my comfort zone, it will be back, as I saw at the beginning of this year.
Yeah. Wow. Whew, it's good to hear. I'm not the only one.
Well, can I just, from my side, finish just by saying something in conclusion from my side to the audience, which is, if you've made it to the end of this video, you almost certainly will make it to the end of your journey to becoming a translator, and you'll never regret it. It's fantastic. I remember in my years of learning Tibetan, which for me was very difficult. I have no language skills. It was really difficult and unpleasant. I really was unhappy. But I met a very highly regarded English translator, and he said to me, persevere, it will be worth it in the end. And I took that on faith. I'll ask you now to take that on faith too. And it will be worth it in the end, because you will be giving the most precious of gifts every single time you translate. Giving a gift that in no other way can we give, because we're not qualified like these Geshes and Rinpoches and Khenpos that you'll be working for. And it'll be many lifetimes until we are. But we are the conduit to link these incredible beings to other ordinary people like us. And we are playing a role that is so beyond our level, but yet we are able to do this and facilitate it. And it's the most amazing gift that you will be giving with every translation. And the connection that you make with a Lama, I can only imagine the benefits that will come in lifetimes to come. And this is also very nice, to know that future rebirths will go well, and hopefully one can continue to give well because of the quality of being that one really is making a very intimate and close connection with, in the most important of ways, that this connection is to do with giving the Dharma. So persevere, you'll be amazed at the value of what you receive when you give.
What a beautiful thing to say. I have nothing else to add, so I'll just finish this recording. And thank you so much for your time and for your really precious advice.